Randy Hays, one of the St. Louis police officers who arrested Officer Luther Hall, says he was in the wrong the night Hall was arrested and beaten. The trial of 3 other officers charged in the case is underway in federal court. The I-Team's Christine Byers is live outside the courthouse after another day of testimony. And Christine, it sounds like the questioning was extensive.
That's right, Casey. Attorneys spent hours going through every aspect of Luther Hall's arrest, frame by frame, moment by moment. And I can tell you some of it got pretty intense, especially when defense attorneys got Hays to admit that some of the testimony he offered today in court differed from what he told FBI investigators earlier in the investigation. Now, Randy spent most of the day on the stand testifying against former colleagues, specifically that Officer Stephen Cordy kicked Luther Hall in the face just before he was taken into custody. Prosecutors released text messages between Hays and former Officer Dustin Boone. One of Hays' messages read that if Hall had been a protester, there, quote, wouldn't be a problem. Meanwhile, defense attorneys tried to show Hays had changed his testimony multiple times during different hearings. They also accused Hays of taking a plea deal written by prosecutors in exchange for a lenient sentence. Now, Hays himself has pleaded guilty for his part of this crime, and he's facing 10 years in the federal penitentiary. But prosecutors pointed out today that they can actually not influence the sentence at all. Only a judge can make that determination. But defense attorneys noted that prosecutors can write a letter urging leniency if he cooperates in their investigation. Live in downtown, Christine Byers for the I-Team. 5 on your side.
A lot of people reached out to me and have reached out to me and asked me what happened to this particular dirty cop. What happened to that particular dirty cop? Now, one particular dirty cop that a lot of people are asking about is the dirty cop, Randy Hays. Randy Hays was a leading person on the assault on Luther Hall. Luther Hall, of course, was the undercover black cop. The cop was undercover doing protests because another white cop had, been charged with first-degree murder for the killing of a black suspect, Anthony Smith, and placing a weapon on Anthony Smith after he had died. And it was a big cover-up that the circuit attorney in St. Louis City felt as if warranted a first-degree murder charge. So after Jason Stockley was acquitted of all charges and walked, there were protests downtown St. Louis. During the protests, that leads us back to Luther Hall. Luther Hall is a black cop undercover downtown. The white cops, including Bailey Colletta, Randy Hays, and the other cops who was, in on this situation, didn't know he was undercover. So guess what they do? They yell racial epithets at him. They beat him, and it results in a big fallout. So they try to do a big cover up. And of course, it resulted in Randy Hays pleading guilty to charges as a result of this incident and going to prison. He got sentenced to 4 years. So, he just got released from prison about a year ago. And, it's interesting to see how his life is taking a turn. So let's not forget, around the time all of this happened, this incident happened on September the 17th, 2017. His wife had just filed from divorce from him. His wife had filed from divorce from him on the 2nd of August, 2017. So that was right around the same time, about a month before this incident happened. But, on the 5th, now that was on the 2nd of August. On the 5th of August, 2017, Mr. Hays had actually been arrested by the Missouri Highway Patrol for driving while intoxicated in Reynolds County, Missouri. So, it was kind of funny because he had actually been showing a pattern of irresponsible and reckless and, oftentimes criminal behavior. And let's not forget, Randy Hays was cheating on his wife with Bailey Colletta. And Bailey Colletta was Randy Hays was, Bailey Coletta's field training officer. She was a 24-year-old rookie cop, 23-year-old in the academy, 24 years old at the time of this incident. So, of course, she ended up pleading guilty. He ended up going to prison. She gets 3 years probation. Now, here we are 4 or 5 years later after all the dust is settled on everyone's criminal cases. Now, Randy is, out of prison. Like I said, he's been out for a year. And Bailey what is Bailey doing? Well, she found another guy to link up with. This time it's not her boss that she's sleeping with. It was not a person who's a coworker of hers at the police department, because she's lost all of her ability to be a police officer. She lost her police officer's certification. She can't work in law enforcement again because now she's a convicted felon. She found another obese gentleman to link up with. And now she just got married. That's right. She just got married to, basically a man who looks like her grandpa, Ryan Hughesman. So Bailey Colletta now is known as Bailey Hughesman. She went and got married, moved on with her life. So no longer is she sleeping with her co-workers at the police department or sleeping with her field training officer at the police department, the St. Louis Police Department. Now, I guess once again, she's in search of love from an older man, and she get married a guy who basically looked like it's her grandfather. So I don't know exactly what she's doing with her life, her professional life, but her married life or her personal life look like it's on the up and up. Definitely like it's on the up and up. It's good to see a man who is out there who's willing to accept her for who she is, even though her past was what it was. She just turned 30 years old this year. Just turned 30, so I guess this was a good time for her to go ahead and settle down. The guy who she married, Lord knows what he does for a living, but maybe he was, a safe place for her. Security. Things that oftentimes people are looking for once they become convicted felons. Definitely a police officer. Bailey was a police officer. We all know most police officers don't have any, especially on the beat cops. They don't have any skills outside of, what they have. And that's why they're forced to be police officers. Nobody wants to be a police officer for the most part. A lot of times it's about just being able to abuse power, having power and abusing it. And that's probably exactly why she found herself in a situation where she did. So, that's the update for him. So, let's go down the list. The guy she was dating, cheating with, Randy Hays, just got out of prison last year. That bad cop is gone out the way. He cannot be a cop again. He's a convicted felon. Bailey Hughesman, she got 3 years probation, walked her probation down, had to spend 2 weekends in jail. She just got married. And everybody else basically moved on with their life. So I've always said, everybody knows St. Louis is divided strongly along racial lines. It doesn't matter if you're part of the law enforcement community or what you're part of. It is extremely divided along racial lines. I've been in grocery stores. I've had friends that were cops. They themselves tell me it does not matter that they have a uniform on. Those people still hate them because they're black. That's what sheriff's deputies have told me. That's what police officers have told me in St. Louis. So it is what it is. So it was a great thing for me to see these two cops and the other ones, all white ones, go down and get held accountable for their actions because they think they can do this stuff, get away with it with impunity, operate with impunity. In fact, you heard what the other cop said in the text message. He said, "Hey, man, if this wasn't an undercover cop this was happening to, if it was just a regular black guy, it wouldn't be an issue." So this goes to show that what their mentality really, it wasn't really remorseful about it. They were just mad they got caught. One last thing, I always thought it was crazy in this situation. When I read the court documents for Bailey Colletta, how she basically tried to throw her lover, her boyfriend, her field training officer, Randy Hays, under the bus. Should I throw him under the bus? In this part of, one of the documents in which she filed to try to get a lesser sentence, and when she objected in court documents to some of the sentencing enhancements and words that they were trying to, things they were trying to put on her for her sentencing. This is what she said. She said, her lawyer said, "As has been noted, defendant Colletta graduated from the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Academy in April 2017. In March of 2017, 1 month prior to her graduation, she attained 24 years of age. Following graduation from the academy, Sergeant Randy Hays was her initial field training officer. Colletta was a naive, unmarried 23-year-old at the time. Hays was 31 and married. Hays engaged in a highly inappropriate romantic relationship with Colletta. Hays and his wife were divorced soon thereafter, and the relationship between Colletta and Hays continued, and they were still romantically involved on the evening of September 17, 2017, when the assault of LH occurred. Colletta, a probationary officer out of the academy on the job for only 5 months, should not be cast as the instigator of LH's arrest, but instead a follower. You know, this is what she said in the court documents. So it was crazy how they just, basically try to cast the blame on each other, sleeping with each other, cheating on their wives, lying to the FBI, lying to grand juries. These are the cops that are out here in the community, y'all. And there are many of them. So I definitely encourage you guys, if you guys know a cop that's doing illegal stuff, report they butt to the FBI. Because there's a lot more where this came from. It's completely crazy. Once you read the rest of this document, it says she also followed the lead of other senior team members and policemen that converged on LH, including her team sergeant, Anthony Caruso, who at the time was her FTO, field training officer, having replaced Hays once the romantic relationship between Colletta and Hays became known to department superiors. So, this was a ton of mess. And I'm happy that, all of these guys got locked up. Can't wait to see more of them get booked because they all deserved it. So, tell me what you guys think in the comments. This is Mr. 100K a day. Another great video with 100K Paralegal Services. Till next time, y'all. Peace.
Information tonight in the latest sentencing tied to a St. Louis officer's beating.
Just hours ago, another former St. Louis officer learned their punishment related to the 2017 incident. Bailey Colletta, News 4, caught up with her after a previous court date, was sentenced to 3 years probation and 2 consecutive weekends in jail. Colletta admitted she lied to the FBI about what she saw when Luther Hall was assaulted. Hall was undercover during protest. Officers beat him, and his injuries were so severe it took weeks for Hall to recover. Colletta's attorney says she apologized to Hall during today's sentencing.
She had a terrible lapse of judgment, and she learned that you better weigh your words and know the consequences of what you say because they could be terrible.
2 days ago, ex-cop Randy Hays was sentenced to more than 4 years in prison for using excessive and unreasonable force against Hall. A jury convicted former officer Dustin Boone in June. He faces sentencing in June.